I feel like the combination of self-sovereign identity with interoperability of these virtual avatar personas will be like the key driving forces to create this truly open metaverse. But I'm curious to hear what everyone thinks here in the roundtable discussion. And if anyone's got any questions, please, ask.
Okay, let's hear from your peers as well. But for now, thank you very much on the added value. Sammy Tuber. And then your peers around this roundtable. Let's hear from co-founder of Inevitable, Kaina Oliveira, and community manager of Venly, Austin Harris, and also senior specialist at Movella, Stefan Beuker. You can join us center stage here as well, joining Sami. What are your thoughts about the added values of interoperability? Now in plural, right? Added values. Who first? Or who second after Sami?
Well, I can start off. I think for me, what the metaverse should be is like browsing the web. It doesn't matter on which platform I do it, in which browser, it pretty much always works. And I think that's where interoperability is very important, that a user should not worry about whether they go to platform A or platform B, and they can always take their identity with them. And I think that's really important, especially that what Sammy's also mentioning, that even in whatever platform you are, people know that the identity you're taking with you is yours. So for me, I think that's really important.
And the proof of humanity issue, the SSI, Sammy mentioned.
I just like to add to that. There's a company, like as an example, right? There's a company, Crucible. I'm sure you all know about it. And they developed an SDK, like blueprints to the open metaverse. And like that kind of relates to like your avatar identities and being able to take that with your sovereign wealth and your crypto wallet, like in DeFi between different decentralized platforms. But if we can achieve this and come up with open standards, like I think this is the biggest challenge, which we're going to get into later, right? About, the issue with like 3D and spatial is like these files can get very complicated. And like I can attest, like being a content creator, I have this virtual avatar VTuber setup and having to rig the character and then stream it from Unreal Engine. And I'm wearing a Rococo suit, which is an indie motion capture suit. It's a lot of work at the moment. I mean, we need to get to that point where we can do this easily between different decentralized platforms. But I think, it's a bit of a long way off, realistically and pragmatically speaking. So I think if we can come up with this progressive interoperability, I think that's like the most pragmatic way to think about it. But I definitely think that there's this vision, right, for this open metaverse, because no one wants to be dictated to how to look or how to be able to represent yourself. You know what I mean? Like, I think everyone is going to have their own story and multiple identities. And I think it will strongly relate to, DAOs, decentralized autonomous organizations, and connect to these decentralized worlds for how to conduct yourself. And maybe there's some sort of rules and conventions, but at least you have that choice and you can have multiple avatar identities that are interoperable that connect to your SSI, on the back end and all your sovereign wealth.
Yeah, that's also what you're working on, fellow speakers, Kaina?
Let me just reach the front, guys, to try and figure this one out.
Yeah, join us standard stage, please.
Cool. This is a very different experience than just joining a Zoom call, guys. Very different. Yeah, I completely agree with Sammy. I think that having an open standard that everybody abides by is it's the most complex part.
Yeah, we have a soundtrack. Is that a creator or just background noise?
I don't know where it's coming from. All right, but
if it's just background noise, please mute yourself.
I think that's a big challenge is internal and external dependencies and liabilities. We have internal liabilities of necessities because we need to create a standard that is extensible because right now we want, for example, to tag metadata that could be used for Unreal Engine 5, but we're going to get Unreal Engine 6 and those previous entities will have to be migrated there. So coming up with a standard that can support that is already very difficult, and then getting everybody to agree with it, that's key because you can't just propose a standard and apply it yourself. It has to work for everybody, and it's still an environment that people don't know exactly how we're gonna use it for in 5 years, 10 years. So trying to come up with something that will have to be followed by everybody can be extensible is just very complex, but it's not, it's not a question of whether the value that it brings is good enough. No, it's inevitable. By the way, name of the company, see, but it's inevitable. Things will have to be interoperable.
Yeah, so means to this end are open standards for NFTs.
Sorry, what?
So means to this end, in order to achieve interoperability, we need open standards for NFTs. That's the key.
Not only NFTs, because NFTs evoke an image on our head of profile pictures and of the assets that like we have right now, but having tokens that can be integrated everywhere in general. So having a token standard for things that are going to be used as game items, as environments, as costumes, as that kind of standard, not necessarily just NFTs how we have them now.
I just want to add to that with what you were saying. Like these open standards also connects to this concept of metaphor, which Jamie coined part of his paper. I'm sure you've all read from Outlier Ventures, but it combines fungibility and non-fungibility. Yeah, thank you for clapping. Yeah, because I think it connects to DeFi, but as well like the metaverse and like thinking about these new value models that it's very hard to conceive because we're so in the beginning stages, but it directly connects to interoperability and with that PwC paper that we referenced for this talk, like it's like that we believe like companies will have a distinct competitive advantage if they at least consider this concept of interoperability because it directly relates to the Web3 ethos, which is like value to the individual and to the community and being in control of your own data.
Okay, so other speakers, are there any other pathways to interoperability we haven't discussed yet? But we should.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and add something on. So I think something that's really interesting can you hear me?
Yeah, we can.
Okay, cool. So I just wanted to add on to the previous conversation about that there's a new token standard. I don't know if it's as popular yet. It's called the ERC 3664. So it's basically what we think is going to become the gaming standard because what it allows for is like degradation of the token. So essentially like it puts a timestamp on it. So I think, and I don't want to mispronounce your name, Raina. You said it before that that there kind of really wasn't a way to have like gaming NFTs because as we know, games need to be upgraded over time, and let's say if the economies of one of these games maybe goes inflationary or deflationary, we need to have some type of mechanism to maybe balance that out. So I think a lot of what's going into it is realizing like that these token standards are kind of evolving. Like we have the ERC20 standard, which is like your standard fungible. We have the 721 standard, which is your standard non-fungible. We just released the MetaRing, which is the ERC 1155 standard. So it's kind of like semi-fungible, basically. But then we now have this ERC 3664, which is, it kind of like adds another layer onto it. So the token can actually expire at a date in the future. or the token can expire if it's used in a game and it receives some type of like battle damage or something like that. So I think that we're going to start to see a lot more token standards emerge that might fit the mold of the things that we're trying to build. But they're just not, they're either not here yet, or they're not as evenly distributed as the other standards that we've so come to see. So I just kind of wanted to add that on there as well.
Yeah, and these new token standards you mentioned so far, Austin, also give reason to to be concerned about the multiple standards that will be in place. Will there be chaos, kinda?
I don't think so. It's just like Austin said, it's different standards for different uses. Yeah, but another strategy that I also see is using proxies for a lot of stuff. But I would like to raise this point with the table about because proxies kind of hurt the immutability of the token itself, but there must be like a point of diminishing returns of where having everything decentralized might not be as good for maintainability. Yeah, so I would just like to talk with all of you about how decentralized we have to be, and is it at cost of being more future proof, you know?
Yeah. So if we discuss challenges to achieve interoperability, the first challenge or category is cross-engine, right, Kaina?
Yes.
So what should we think of first, Kaina?
Sorry, can you repeat?
So what should we think of first, Kaina, in terms of cross-engine challenges? What are the
Yeah.
things that make you concerned?
The thing that makes me the most concerned is definitely this maintainability part, because it's unavoidable to have limitations, have bugs, or have projects that push the envelope of what whoever came up with the standard first meant it to do. So yeah, my biggest concern is maintainability, and I think that strategies like proxies are good because we can upgrade things, but they come at a cost of being less decentralized. They are not centralized, but they are not immutable. Sorry, that was the word I was looking for. Yeah, because Austin is right. We will need, there is no one standard that will solve every problem that we have. We'll need different ones for different necessities. And I think that even amongst themselves, they will need to be maintainable and upgradable.
Yeah, maintainable and upgradable. And any other concerns about cross-engine challenges, fellow speakers?
Yeah, I'll add on to what Kaina said. Sorry, I mispronounced your name before. But
No, it's
I'll add
fine.
on. I'll add on to that as well. I think it's gonna be a very interesting battle because, like, at the end of the day, like, this all needs to be usable for like the average person, and that is gonna require, one, the token standards, but also like maybe like some bridging standards, just because, you know, at the core of interoperability is like, I think right now everybody's thinking like, oh, ETH is gonna, you know, be the base layer because, you know, of EVMs, and like everything's eventually gonna have to go back to it, you know, whether it's Solana or Avalanche or Cardano or Tezos or whatever, because ETH is the most decentralized and therefore should be the base layer of like the record keeping. But I think that like there's because once you start to bridge things, you're inevitably going to create like layers of insecurity. Like, I don't know if anybody kept up with the Axie Infinity snafu, where they I don't know exactly what happened, but basically they were able to hack the Ronin sidechain, which was a bridge from Polygon, I believe. But they somehow like got into the bridge and were able to get away with 173,000 Ether, which is like $600 million, basically. But like the reason that I'm bringing
Sounds like quite a heist.
Yeah, quite the you know, thing going on there. But I think at the core of it, and what I'm trying to get at is that like it's a very uphill battle because first and foremost, there's a small subset of people that can even like think about these things and actually implement them. But then it's like, it's just, you have to worry about the security of it, because at the end of the day, like if this wants to be usable by billions of people, it's going to need to have that layer of trust. And if every side chain that gets created with every token standard, has to have a bridge back to, some other base layer, then I think it's just going to add a layer of vulnerability. So that's kind of what I wanted to get at. I think that's going to be a problem going forward, but I think that we're going to be able to solve it. So, yeah.
And do you see a role for yourself as well, working for a blockchain tech provider, storing assets is your core business?
Yeah,
Isn't
I
it?
think, yeah. So Venly's got a few products. We've of course got the wallet, which is the custody of the assets. We have Marketplace, which allows for the exchange of the assets that you custody. And then we also have APIs, which are basically tools for the builders. So like we provide tools to Shopify, we provide tools to the Sandbox to basically help them like keep their system running smooth. But yeah, like there's a lot to it. I think that we play a key role, whether it's in the technological side of it or just in coming here and sharing our beliefs. Like I think that's why I think this panel is extremely important, because I think in order to solve the bigger problems that like we need to solve, we need to have more of these conversations where we can gather, 20 something people that say, okay, maybe this is how we should do it. And then that has a butterfly effect, and maybe 10 years down the line, the problems that would have arisen are now solved because we were able to come together here. So, yeah.
Okay. And about ways to overcome the cross-engine challenges to interoperability so far, what would you like to know? Any questions from participants, audience members? I see some cheering going on. Are there also questions in your minds? What would you like to know, or what would you like to put onto the roundtable?
About that
Okay.
part of everybody coming up with their own standards, that is a part that also worries me, because we are in
That's
a
good.
we are in an ecosystem where there is a lot of money to be had, and if you gatekeep your technology and your integrations, I think that if you have an audience for that, you can make a lot of money with that. But on the long run, we will rely on everybody agreeing with something, because we will need exchangeability of things, and that comes with agreed upon standards. So I think it's not, it has to be, we have to agree on standards, and these kinds of roundtables and discussions are very very useful for that.
Okay, so we seem to have a divide here. Some people claiming that there will be chaos. Daniel introduced the term of all kinds of open standards. And on the other hand, there's Austin saying each standard will be to their own use. So we have different uses, so the chaos will be limited. What's your view, audience members? You can just unmute yourself and join in. About the challenges to achieve interoperability and the open standards issue. Are you concerned, anyone? Who believes that chaos will rise? If you raise your hand, just wave, click one. Wave if you believe that chaos will rise. Okay, Danielle, so far, and Stefan? Yes, Stefan, can you add on to that?
Well, I think in the beginning it will be chaos until multiple companies and platforms will see that chaos just will not work. I mean, we will have to eventually all look in the same direction if we want to make this work. And if people are not willing, then this will eventually never work until someone really gets or creates a proper standard for everything that we're trying to achieve. So I think in the beginning, especially now with, I mean, you see Meta is developing something, Epic is doing something, so there will be different standards, but it'll take time, I guess.
I think
I
it
just
will
want to add
definitely take
to
time.
that.
Sammy?
You can never have one standard.
We have
Yeah.
two people talking. First Sammy and then PWNK Digital. So first Sammy, your position.
Cool. Yeah, I think part of the standards will directly also interrelate like with like a DAO or like a few DAOs like working together like public service to come up with these agreed upon standards, in my opinion, as well as artificial intelligence. Like we're already seeing that like with like the Ready Player Me avatars, right? Like as you know, even these avatars, but it's almost like getting the AI to agree between all these different decentralized platforms with the file systems. And like obviously there are like, in my opinion, market leaders like with the game engines like Unreal and Unity, but you know, it's like anything with technology, it's like it becomes more and more democratized and frictionless over time. So you know, it's too early to tell, but I think we want to make it as frictionless as possible. But at the same time, from a creator's perspective, being a creator, we don't want to like hinder the creativity, right? You don't want to as well to make it so frictionless and so like centralized in the sense of, you know, agreed standards that then you hinder, you know, the creativity. So like it's taking all these things into account when we come up with this.
So DAOs will not suffice in order to standardize without becoming too centralized.
Yeah, and I think just creatives in general like don't want to be dictated to with what the standards are, but at the same time, in order to make it work, there needs to be publicly agreed like standards and file sharing and the ability to drag and drop and assistance from AI to make that happen. But you know, it's like anything with technology, it will become more and more democratized over time, which is a good thing.
Yeah, and before we discuss time in another perspective across versions, we will have some room for questions here. Questions or solutions for that matter, for any of the challenges mentioned. We have PWNK Digital still on board.
Yeah. Okay. So from my perspective, the way I see it is that right now you don't have one framework to do everything on the internet. Yeah. So you have at the moment, just to keep it on a short scope, in front-end development, we've got React, Vue, Angular, and other ones, and they all have a different way of operating, and they're all different projects, but they all achieve the same thing. I think you will have proprietary technology to develop metaverse experiences, but for me, the real power is going to come when your everyday developer is able to deploy customized metaverse spaces independently of any big framework or centralized or decentralized metaverse platform.
There we go. What would you like to add? Gentleman raising his hand. I'm approaching you because I don't know your name.
Me?
Yeah.
It's me. It's Remco Sikkema.
Yes,
So
Remco.
I actually, yeah, I think so. Actually, I shared about interoperability yesterday on my LinkedIn profile, and it's interesting. So I work at the same company as Stefan Beuker. So we are in the business of motion
Movella?
capture, and we sorry.
Movella.
Yes, Movella. And we talk to a lot of game developers. And what I notice is there's two ways that they react if you talk about interoperability. There's one side that says, well, it's too complicated. It will never work. It took Roblox at least 2 years to make it for their own platform. So, what if we want all platforms to be interoperable? It's just too big of a project. So this is one side. The other side says, well, it's difficult, but it's doable. And it seems like the ones that have to do this, have to actually make this operability work, are not in sync with each other. So maybe also this is a question for the panel. So do you have a feeling about this? Is it
For instance, for your colleague Remco. So your question to the panel is, what feeling do they have about?
My question is, do you think it's feasible and in a reasonable time?
I feel
let's hear
personally from the second group.
From your colleague first. Your colleague Stefan Beuker, senior specialist at Movella, on this issue your colleague Remco raised.
Well, yeah, I think I'm I guess more on the side of that it is possible, but it's going to be difficult because there are so many platforms and everybody has their own ideas, and how can you make something? I mean, it also depends on what you make standardized. I mean, if you look at avatars, for example, they're in a sense fairly simple. You have a model, you have a mesh, you have an animation, you have some colors. I mean, in that sense, I don't think there is an incredibly I mean, it's not that difficult to get that, at least for the biggest part, standardized. But there's so much more that people want to add, and I think that makes it very difficult.
So people should become a bit less ambitious here.
Well, maybe to start off with, yeah. I mean, you can always build on, if you have a proper base, then you can always build on top of that. I think it's easier to build on something than to have a too high ambition and not being able to get it done.
Okay, gentleman next to me on the first front row. Gentleman with black hair, you'd like to add something, don't you?
Yeah, so maybe just one thing to add. I think we need to prevent that we're going to try to chase like an ideal scenario that might, if you look at USB, for instance, or cables for phones, you still have a couple different formats. It doesn't really matter. So I think you should prevent that you're going to try to chase a single standard with everyone. That's probably not attainable. There's always going to be a big player that sticks to their own format. You're going to have some kind of islands, and where you group your wallet is going to work here, and some of the items are going to work there, and some other items are going to work in a different place. I think you should be more realistic than trying to chase that total ideal.
Yeah,
I
and
think
if
it makes sense.
Yeah,
I think it
agree
makes
with
sense, but talking about the feeling that we have, I think that on the future, instead of the items being interoperable and that being a good extra value that it adds to the product, I think users will expect, if you buy a cosmetic in a game, for you to be able to use in another. I think currently it's like, oh, this is pretty sweet. I can get to use in another game. But in the future, that won't be the case. Like, okay, I cannot use it on Meta's universe then, and that will be expected then. Yeah, that's how I feel.
The question with that is, who picks up the tab? Who pays for interoperability? Is it the DAO, the owner of the initial issuing entity of the avatars, to make their avatars more marketable, more desirable? Or is it the game engine or the experience that has to pick the tab? Or what's the benefit of them picking the tab to solve the interoperability?
Sorry, did you call me out?
Yeah, so whose role is it to act upon this, Sammy?
Yeah, I was just going to add something I was thinking about earlier, like just like from a Gen Z perspective, like, with Fortnite, and seeing the mixed IPs, even though that isn't a siloed, like it's a walled game, right? But like just like being able to interact with different avatar skins that you can recognize from different IPs, like Gen Z mindset is like you would mix and match these different IPs and avatar identities, which is why it is a compelling notion to be able to have that interoperability. But of course, pragmatically, as we all kind of agree, it's, you know, it's more a progression, right? As well as progressive decentralization. I was also thinking about, you know, the concept of like, you know, loot NFTs and like this more like bottom up approach rather than the creator makes the avatar, right? And then it's like top down and it's like, well, then how do you deploy it and make it interoperable? Whereas maybe the concept of loot, an RPG kind of DAO's loot kind of thing is like another way of looking at it, just another perspective for how to achieve interoperability when you just start with the fundamental metadata, right? And then like create different low poly, high poly versions, but it's in the same style. Just some ideas I'm riffing off.
Yeah, so your position on the DAO loot system?
Sorry, what was the question?
So what's your opinion here? What's your position on the DAO loot system you mentioned, right?
Yes, my position and opinion is just it's another interesting perspective, which is something most creators are not used to when you are the creator of that asset or that avatar, you know, and then work out then how to make it interoperable. That more community kind of RPG like loot bottom up approach is another way of looking at it, maybe with PFPs. It's just another perspective.
Well, to end with the second challenge, we've discussed cross-engine challenges in quite some detail. What about cross-version challenges? So how to deal with the future? Stefan Beuker.
Yeah, I guess, I mean, in principle, this is for the biggest part most likely similar to a cross-engine. So what you want to have is a standard, or at least aim for a standard that every platform can use. In that sense, if the standard receives an update, then the platforms can act accordingly, because then you at least have one thing that changes, everybody's aware, and they will change upon that. And it depends on how much, I mean, also, what are these things? So is it NFTs? Are they tokens? Are they just regular file types? I mean, in that sense, again, you should have a standard file type or token that everybody in that sense is using, and then see if it from the base updates, then everybody needs to you know, go along with that.
Sure. Speakers, who would like to add to this?
Yeah. So we are mostly talking about like structure of metadata of tokens, right? Stefan?
Also file types. I think it's multiple things. So I mean, you have NFTs, you have tokens, you have file types, specific structures. I think everything is updatable, right? And we need to, I think the foundation, what you would like to have is something that is in a sense standardized, that, I mean, an Unreal Engine should be able to use it, and a Unity should be able to use it, or any other platform that would like to create something on the metaverse, that if the foundation is being updated, that they have to act accordingly in that sense.
I just wonder who, just like PWNK Digital said, who is responsible for that? Not in the sense of a financial cost, but just like responsibility. Who would we want to maintain those? Who we will want to maintain and decide that kind of stuff? You know? Do you have any idea?
Yeah. Well, I think that's the big question. I mean, will we have one company that maintains that, which is probably not the case, because they don't want to be able to maintain it on themselves, especially financially wise. You could look at it as blockchain where you have collaborators so that everybody participates in doing that, but that might also be a very difficult thing. Or you could look at, multiple companies stating that, hey, we do want this to work. Let's collaborate with each other and build up a standard for everybody to use. But again, I don't know. It's a very, very difficult question to answer in that sense.
True.
Yeah. Any
Maybe
others?
having a DAO, just like some is. Go on.
Okay, yeah, what I was
Kinda?
going to say is okay, so go on.
So Kaina first, and then PU, PW,
No.
and K.
I would really like to know what PN has to say.
Okay. Maybe can
Okay,
you
so-
mention your surname, PWNK?
Okay, yeah. So the way I see it working, that if you buy an avatar, an NFT, you're buying into basically the whole ecosystem, represented as a DAO, and they are responsible to work with different, say, game companies to implement so they will pay them to the game companies to implement their avatar or avatar system that will provide it. That will be one of the benefits of buying an avatar of those collections. Like, for example, if we look at the Bored Ape collection, they could, with the amount of spending power they have at the moment, approach any company and introduce their characters in a AAA game, no problem. They will pay for that. That will make owning one of those Bored Apes extremely valuable. If a lot more companies, if they manage to get more games on board, so that's the way I see it. So those big DAOs, as they grow, they can start having that power to basically force the adoption of their collections.
Yeah, Kaina?
Yeah, that's a thing that worries me a bit because
The force,
let's say
right?
that
Where's here?
yes. Let's say I have an idea, but I will need to propose a modification on the standards so I can support this whole new facet of blockchain and the metaverse. How would I go about, and what would it depend on for me to propose and get that change accepted? I would like that part to be as democratic as, I don't know, merit-based as possible, not like based on me holding a certain shares of a DAO, But maybe that would work if me having certain shares of a DAO wouldn't depend on me having to spend money, Yeah, that's my...
Stefan, on this?
Yeah, I think that might also make sense. I mean, especially also where you have people like the apes that have the cash flow to be able to do that. Although at a certain point, are you again not getting too much standards, because if you have 10, 15 different tokens that are pushing their standard because they have the cash flow, doesn't that create chaos again? I mean, it's a balance, and somewhere we need to meet in the middle, I guess.
You need
a standard for all standards. Yeah.
a standard to rule them all.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Kumar, for adding as well. Any questions from your side? What would you like to know about the several categories of challenges we've covered so far to achieve interoperability? Anything that should be mentioned before we wrap up?
I think it's my turn, yeah?
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. I think we're at very early stage to standardize. I think we are all just exploring and and discovering. But I see very similarity with, I think everyone is aware of the W3C, yeah, when HTML started. And I believe that the more we support open source platforms, the more we support the kind of bodies like W3C, this is something will lead to a democratized standard, because I don't think any of the companies will be able to create a standard like for the benefit of everyone. If I am the one building the standard, I will build it for my benefit, yeah?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So,
Okay, so Kumar, your question is where's the common ground?
I think maybe we should focus more on, or is it possible to focus on the role of open source platforms? Because open source will, I think, will give more bigger base of developers and contributors, and this will eventually lead to a certain kind of standard. What do you think, guys?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, no.
What's yours?
Okay. Yeah, I'll kind of add on and give my opinion. So I'll just go back to I think that we should just allow enough people to experiment. I think that there's gonna be maybe new token like standards like the ones that I mentioned before, maybe invented over time, and then based on what you're trying to create, you'll just use those tokens. So I think like in terms of standardization, I think that's going to be a while because we have to go through the experimentation phase first. But I think in terms of like just going back to the underlying technology is that the whole point of this is to be able to essentially keep record of who owns what, because that's essentially like, you know, a tie to our identity. So if you own these specific tokens, or you own whether they're Bitcoin tokens or Ether tokens or some other token that has been created, I think it just goes back to the core of record keeping. So I think that like, at least this is my opinion, but I think, you know, maybe 50 years from now or whatever the timeline is, that we'll stop thinking of tokens in terms of fiat currency, like, you know, Bitcoin's worth 42,000 or whatever. And I think that like Bitcoin, because it was essentially the first, like, I guess, standard of standard tokens, and it's essentially like the base layer for, I guess you could say, transactions. I think that eventually it'll all just lead back to that, because we can all agree that the first block was, you know, December 2009 or whenever it was, and then everything came after that. So that kind of like solves the record keeping thing, or at least back to Ethereum, because Bitcoin doesn't allow for smart contracts. But yeah, I think that it's all just going to come down to the whole point of this is we want to first equitize, you know, being able to participate in some type of economy. But we also want to be able to allow the most type of creative expression possible. And I think that having a standard will kind of limit that. And I think that the people that are building.
So where to strike the balance, Austin?
What'd you say?
So where do we strike the balance, Austin? That's your concern.
Yeah, I really don't know, if we're being honest. I think that I'm big on experimentation. I think that if we want to get the most out of this period in time that we're in, I think that we need to allow the most amount of experiments to be run as possible. And I think in order to do that, we need to, well, first and foremost, make it accessible in terms of like price. So like that's why I think that layer 2s are important, right? But yeah, I'm all for allowing the most creative expressing possibly and doing it in the most equitable way. And I think that's through blockchain technology. So yeah.
There we go. Your hope for the future. Austin Harris, thank you very much.
Yeah.
And we can thank him for that. Yeah. And Kaina Oliveira, your hopes for the future of interoperability.
I do agree with Kumal and Austin that we are still in the experimenting phase. Yeah, it's a necessity that we are seeing on the future, but right now is not the most pressing issue that we have, but I do think that coming up with these standards more than limiting, I think it's more freeing, because as a creator, you wouldn't have to worry about those standards. You can just have your avatar being interoperable, because other platforms can rely on generating that kind of standard for the things you create through them. So from a developer's perspective, it's easier and more freeing, have to integrate just one kind of standard. And for the creator, just the same, because platforms can automate and scale that standard, and yeah, make it cheaper, make it faster. So I think it's good to experimentate, but I do think that coming up with these it's increases freedom and power to creators and builders.
Hopefully, according to you, Kaina Oliveira. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Yeah, then for Movella, Stefan Beuker, what are your hopes for the future of interoperability in the metaverse?
Yeah, well, I think in that sense, I kind of agree with both. So especially now in the beginning, it's all everybody's experimenting. I mean, meta wasn't a term like a year ago, and now everybody's talking about it. So in that sense, I
Yeah.
agree that now is the time to experiment and eventually get to a standard, as Kanya is saying as well, is that we need to be able to rely on things that we create, that it works in platform A, B, C, or whatever. I hope that eventually will come. I think it's a long way to go, but I think we should all aim for that.
Yeah. Okay. For things that you've created with Movella already, and there's a compilation, a compiled video, so to say, we can have a look at it. Danielle, would you like to share it, maybe in the LinkedIn group? Yeah. Yeah. Thank you very much. And the same goes for the alter ego, the self-sovereign identity avatar, hosting the vodcast Future of Humans 3.0 for Sami Tauber. Isn't it, Sami?
Yes, I have a blast doing it, like inhabiting that alter ego. So I just would love to see this. I'd be able to take this character outside Unreal Engine and, you know, be in these different decentralized platforms from a pure creator's perspective, because it's a stylized character, you know what I mean? Like, and so it was made with love and care, and people recognize it. So I would love that ability to be able to take that between different decentralized worlds, right, and have that recognizability, right, and to be able to have those interactions with the community.
Yeah. Yeah, we're looking at your avatar called Vinci.
Of the AI, are favorable, and also reacting to people in different contexts, and like say it's your image or your likeness, right? So how do you have these systems to monitor it?
Yeah, well, you brought up another great example. So let's just take
Yeah,
you. So
that's
you're
that's
performing, right?
a
And
prime example of
like
the
you said,
lack
there's
of
only one of you,
interoperability,
and
isn't
you're
it,
broadcasting
Daniel?
to the world. And let's say I'm walking down the street here in Manhattan, and I've only got my my
Okay,
earbuds
so
in, and I
let's
want to listen to what's going on. I'm
close
going
this
to hear the
video for
audio
now.
part
Let's
of what you're doing.
keep this
If
as an
I was,
example in mind.
in front of my Xbox,
How
and
great
I could
it
like
would
turn
have
into
been
some like
if
super cool
Sami were with
metaverse.
us as Vinci here, right, Sami?
Exactly, especially when you're a storyteller. So I've written like a full-on novel, and my plans for what I'm doing with Vinci is to also integrate the community with community-driven storytelling, as well as like the Vinci story. So like that integrates with PFPs and characters. So I'd love the ability for Vinci to be able to go between kind of like the David Attenborough of the metaverse, open metaverse, and be able to, integrate with different places and have interactions. It'd be really cool, right? Just my thinking.
Okay, and maybe one day in the in the future we can have your super heroine rising in the spatial roundtable session, providing both the well, let's say the artsy part, the creative part of your music and the video clips, but also having her show that interoperability adds value, right? Thank you very much, Sami Tauber, as well. All of the panelists and all of the participants, thank you for exploring as part of the Your Open Metaverse monthly roundtable sessions, exploring both interoperability values and challenges. And who knows what will overcome them.